Hey guys, it's Matthew Zachary, and I want to tell you about the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, or the NCCN. The NCCN creates the treatment guidelines for doctors that help cancer patients lead better lives. But I want you to know that the NCCN also has guidelines for you. The patient guidelines were funded by the NCCN Foundation and were created just for people with cancer and their caregivers. They're free, they're easy to understand, and they're available right now for you, the patient and the caregiver. So go check them out at nccn.org/empower. That's nccn.org/empower.
I'm Joey Brenneman from Offscrip Health. Welcome to the tangential conversation companion to Offscrip Health's Before We Die podcast. We fondly named this bonus episode Lab Before Slab. And these are the sometimes random, often fascinating, and always a little bit quirky conversations that happen around our production table. We wanted to share them with you, but we couldn't quite fit them into our regular episodes, so we had a feeling that there are listeners out there who would enjoy them, so we made these little mini episodes. So here are the Before We Die creators, Sandra Miller, John McMahon, and Craig Ullman to geek out about the latest happenings in the medtech arena. Okay, John, you are kicking us off today. What is happening out there?
Great. Thank you, Joey. So this follows up on a number of threads, one in particular from our conversation with Dr. Yak on health equity. And so health equity from a devices side and pharma side is sort of, who's in your trial and who does that represent? And not only so that you're getting a device that's appropriate. For example, dentistry may not be that sensitive to population studies. But if you start doing cardiovascular work, you realize that women's hearts are smaller. And so they need devices that are actually smaller to get inside their arteries. So you have equity there by sex. Now, as they're moving into CAR T-cell therapies, so these are pharmaceutical therapies, they're realizing that the trials themselves are actually racially biased. And so from a JAMA network, open network article.
Okay. Jargon alert. What's CAR T and what's JAMA?
Okay.
CAR T B cells, as in Cardi B's cells. No, I'm kidding.
JAMA is a Journal of American Medical Association. So it's a journal published online. This is from the online group. From a group at a University of Arkansas studying how many participants are in particular trials. So CAR T-cell is actually a chimeric antigen receptor, that's the CAR, which we can forget. And then T-cell is a type of immune cell that's inside your body.
Yeah, I know the T-cell. It's the CAR that threw me off.
So the chimeric antigen receptor part, and the T-cell is a white blood cell. And white blood cells are really important if you're fighting cancer. So what these new technologies are is they take out your T cells, and the CAR's reference is sort of a nice one. They put in a new engine, really pump up the horsepower, and then they reintroduce these T cells into your body, and they go after the cancers. And they have some amazing results. Really late stage patients signing up for these and getting completely cleared. The CAR T cells can then, unfortunately, then continue to attack healthy cells. So you may have, a 6-month or 2-year remission. So there's a lot of work that's going on these. But the reason why this becomes important from a health equity standpoint is now you're talking to the immune system. So you're looking at how right down to the RNA of a patient is the fundamental responder, right? So now you're in the genetics of a patient, showing who's responding and not responding. And this discussion has come up before in pharma. If the trials are generally white males that are near high academic centers, that you're developing arguably racist drugs. And it's a interesting thought conversation, but this article that came out is particularly talking about the fundamentals in this one space that's not just giving you a drug, but really accelerating your immune system to go after a cancer.
So the question is, what exactly?
Well, the recruiting opportunity then is to broaden your recruitment so it matches the patient population that you represent. Craig, you and I were involved in a trial that got done down in LSU in COVID, which arguably has some disordinate social representations of who was getting sick. And one of the things we compared was to make sure that the patients we enrolled mapped to the demographics, racial and social as best we could, and age of the county, of the parish that we were in. That was something that we did. We wouldn't have been able to change it. We were fortunate that we got that alignment. But could you then proactively say that's a component in a trial? And that's really what that article is about, is saying, hey, how do we make sure that we have representative trials? And this idea of democratizing a trial also democratizes your access to new therapies. There are some companies that are going after it for devices like the Hawthorne effect, where they're taking trials outside of the demographic and geographic areas of UCSF and Harvard, these sort of coastal centers or the Mayo Clinic, and really distributing who can get treated. That's a really interesting health equity opportunity. And I think it's important, a really great follow-up from the conversation on that topic.
It's a really difficult problem on a bunch of levels, because you've got a traditional and well-earned suspicion on the part of a lot of Black people towards the medical community for all sorts of really good reasons, because the medical community has often taken advantage of Black people, experimented on Black people historically, and not responded to their needs. So for years and years, a lot of white doctors have assumed that Black people were less able to feel pain, and so they'd give them lower amounts of painkillers, when that was just a myth. Racism pervades the whole culture, and that's an ugly truth that we have to deal with in all sorts of respects.
But this isn't denying people that don't want to be in a study. The only way you move this into the consciousness is we talk about it, which is what we're trying to do here at Lab Before Slab, right? Like, how can we impact this? This article is saying it exists, and then how do you intervene?
The COVID-19 pandemic showed us how a microscopic virus could upend our lives and how unprepared our society was for it. There's so much more out there that we need to understand, which is why I recommend subscribing to Crooked Media's America Dissected, hosted by former Detroit Health Commissioner Dr. Abdul El Sayed. Each week, Dr. El Sayed sits down with doctors, scientists, culture makers, and policy leaders to ask questions like, how could new genetic discoveries change our relationship with our own genes? How could addiction to social media change our brains? Or how even climate change could make the next major pandemic more likely? To hear discussions on these topics and more, check out America Dissected from Crooked Media. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, I think it's one of the things that, the FDA and the agency that regulates medical devices under FDA, which is called the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, there's just this fundamental challenge of, you need to have a quality, study, and the design has to be, appropriate, but then it's never going to be perfect. So what's good enough? How do you set up the requirements for the enrollment and the diversity, the population or demographic diversity that's relevant for a particular clinical trial, in such a way that you're sort of striking that balance between doing good enough for the betterment of more people versus perfect? There's an inherent tension here, because I think the regulatory agencies are trying to do better and shine more light on this issue. They're trying to, for example, engage patients and the patient perspective in, the process that it takes to get whether it's a drug or device approved. But, these things take time to get put in place. And, I think it's a really tough issue. It's a big weakness as part of our system right now. And I think there are a lot of people who are trying to make it better. And it's something we can, maybe shine a light on a little bit more, and we can all get smarter about it, maybe in future episodes of Before We Die.
It's also very hard on the side of the innovators. It's also frequently very hard to get patients who are willing to participate in a trial. So you're kind of happy whoever comes through the door.
Yeah, that's the point. That's why it's hard to get to perfect, is that patient enrollment in the trials is not easy.
Well, I think on the cardiovascular side, the past 10 years, they've certainly made a really strong impact to add women to trials because they're the cardiovascular trials, because the women's outcomes were substandard that were in these trials. And actually a fair amount of it has been linked now to actually the size of the arteries, not to the sex, right? But you have to do that study to find out. And this article, right, isn't taking us through all the mechanisms, and enrolling troubles is certainly something that I've suffered through in my career and challenges. But, they're talking about the CAR T cell summary saying that Black patients are 2 to 5% of the total patients enrolled. And they're just bringing up to say, hey, is there a conversation we can have? Is there a resource that's constraining it? Is it enrollment? It's always a linear combination of all those things. But until you have the conversation, you don't know where to look. And so I commend them for bringing it up. And it certainly helps as we move closer and closer to working off genetic signatures and looking at genetic profiles in patients. That's actually more sensitive to me than dental work or even the cardiovascular aspects. It's a really key point for those diseases.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have the conversations, and just because something's hard, if it's hard to enroll people, to not let that be the end of the conversation. And I think that goes across the board, not only in this category, but in a lot of other categories and institutions, to not stop there and to go, yeah, it's hard. This is now part of it, is that we have to engage a diverse group of people. And, there is the earned mistrust within the communities because of like the Henrietta Lacks cells and all that stuff. But so to really engage people with education and where things are moving, and to make them want to be part of these trials. And that takes more effort, but it is definitely worth it, I think. So thus ends another Lab Before a Slab, and we are just so happy that you are here with us to think about these things. Join us next time, because you never know where the Lab Before Slab conversation is going to go. And for more in-depth conversations with our medtech innovators, join us for our regular episodes of Before We Die on this very same feed. Thanks for listening. Take care, everybody. Lab Before Slab is an Offscrip Health production. The executive producers are Matthew Zachary and Andrew McDowell. Our senior producers are Joey Brenneman and Ariel Nachman. Lab Before Slab is mixed by Kyle Moore. Our Lab Before Slab panel of experts and creators of the show are Sandra Miller, John McMahon, and Craig Allman. If you like the show, ratings and reviews are always welcome. Leave us a message at 855-AUDIO-66. That's 855-283-4666. Share your healthcare stories, and we might just play them on the air in a future episode. For more information, visit offscrip.com. That's offscrip, no T.com.